Fox News alert, the big blow to the Republican establishment heard loud and clear. Christian conservative Roy Moore trouncing incumbent Senator Luther Strange in the Alabama Republican primary runoff. The former Chief Justice of that state Supreme Court telling his supporters that he will help make America great again, despite the fact that President Trump stumped for his rival. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. With us today, Harris Faulkner, the editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, former Deputy State Department spokesperson under President Obama, Marie Harf, is here, and today's #1lucky guy, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he is outnumbered.
Favorite colleagues. Thank you, ladies, for having me.
Wonderful to have you.
Yeah, welcome. Hump Day Sizzle, baby.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Sizzle.
My tie and Sandra's dress. Look at that.
And you think we planned it, Judge.
See what I'm saying?
All right, a lot to get to. Let's begin. We have a winner in Alabama, outsider Roy Moore, beating Senator Luther Strange by nearly 10 points, despite being outspent 10-1, and despite President Trump campaigning for Strange. But even though his guy lost, analysts say the president may have come out the winner, too, since he and Moore are cut from the same anti-Washington drain-the-swamp cloth. That sentiment echoed by Moore last night in his victory speech.
Together we can make America great. We can support the president. Don't let anybody in the press think that because he supported my opponent that I do not support him and support his agenda.
Meantime, President Trump praising Moore's victory, tweeting this morning, spoke to Roy Moore of Alabama last night for the first time. Sounds like a really great guy who ran a fantastic race. He will help to make America great again. And there you have it. What did you make of all the
I have to tell you that they are both friends of mine, Chief Justice Moore and Senator Strange. I was very strongly in the Moore camp because I'm sort of the anti-establishment type myself, as Marie and our colleagues know. But I think the president made a mistake by violating Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not campaign against a fellow Republican. It's one thing to support a fellow Republican in a primary. It's another thing to bring the machinery of the federal government, including your vice president, down there in the weekend before the primary. I think this is a rejection of a different Donald Trump, because Donald Trump and Roy Moore are very similar in their attitudes about government, about the establishment. I'm befuddled as to why he was on the Luther Strange side, unless he had to make a deal with Mitch McConnell, who was also a big loser here.
I thought that, too. I thought that might have been in the works. Maybe it wasn't any sort of a formal deal like he did with the Democrats. But maybe it was one of those kind of wink-wink things of, look, there's a guy running. He doesn't really think that the state's going to flip anyway, like it's going to remain Republican. So what would it hurt to have a little political mojo behind this guy running?
Does the Democrats stand a chance there? Is it a serious Democrat?
It is a serious Democrat. No, it is. It is.
Well, it's Alabama.
It's interesting. Carl Rove called Roy Moore this year's Todd Akin.
Oh, boy, that's dangerous.
Which is interesting, who lost.
Not the guy who actually won American Idol.
No.
That's
Clay Akin. But the guy who defeated Dick Lugar in a primary and then lost to Joe Donnelly in Indiana. Indiana's not Alabama.
Right.
But this was a bad day yesterday for Mitch McConnell. This was a campaign run against Mitch McConnell, and that was very clear. I think the Democrat is a serious candidate, but it's Alabama.
It's Alabama.
I don't know.
Look at the spread, though, if you will, of how President Trump won over his opponent in November. I mean, that spread, you can't wipe that out. It doesn't really matter. You knew that the state would go red.
It's definitely going to be a Republican, for sure.
And Roy Moore, I don't know if you've seen Katie online, because you and I are on social media a lot together. I mean, it is lit up for him today.
Yeah, I mean, people are excited. They're moving forward. The president deleted his tweets supporting Luther Strange and then tweeted out support. Right, so strange. Then tweeted out support for Roy Moore. So they're both moving forward to implement the president's agenda, which is important. Also, keep in mind that this is Jeff Sessions' old seat, right? So Roy Moore will probably vote very in consistency with what Jeff Sessions does. But the overall picture here is, yes, Mitch McConnell, very bad day. And this also reemphasizes this anti-Washington, anti-establishment sentiment that's been going on since 2009, 2010, really. And I don't think that's going away in the 2018 elections either.
Can I raise something else about Senator McConnell? And you may know about this. How bad is it that he and his PAC spent $8 million
and that's the thing.
in Alabama, all gone, all wasted?
Well, and that's another lesson here. I mean, how much money is the establishment Republican sector of the conservative side of the political spectrum
right.
going to continue throwing at these candidates, whether it's Jeb Bush
at
or Luther Strange,
when there are Democrats who are vulnerable that they should be focused
and
on.
It also proves that money is not everything, right?
Which is we don't need that proof. We've already seen it. We saw it on November 8th of 2016. It's like what also I noticed with this is that it flies in the face of how Donald Trump got elected. So the people that he puts his political mojo behind, I would imagine they shouldn't need to spend that much cash because they ought to be able to get it done the way that he did.
So based on everything you just said, Katie, I'm still taking this in, can this be classified as a victory for the president then still?
I think it can. If you look at what people in Alabama are saying who voted for Roy Moore, they actually believe that the president was somehow pushed into supporting Luther Strange.
That's right.
Judge, you looked at me funny when I asked that question.
I gave you that look because Roy Moore was ahead by 5 points until the weekend when Donald Trump and Mike Pence came in, and he won by 10 points. I think they made a profound mistake going.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't a mistake. I think it was a huge mistake, and it made no sense for the president to endorse Luther Strange, especially when Mitch McConnell, who's one of the most unpopular politicians in the country, was backing him. I mean, he has a low approval rating even in Kentucky.
So was Mitch McConnell backing Luther Strange? Because Luther Strange is more of a yes man for Mitch McConnell, and Roy Moore is more of a Rand Paul, a more independent thinker amongst the Republicans?
I think because he wanted someone who was actually interested in governing. I mean, candidates that are these insurgent candidates like Roy Moore, we were talking about this, they come to disrupt.
You think Roy Moore is a bomb thrower?
I think he would say he's a bomb thrower, right? And insurgent candidates may win elections, they get headlines, but they haven't shown that they're really good at governing yet.
Neither have establishment Republicans.
I agree.
So it's a wash. I mean,
I agree.
If you're going to take an establishment Republican,
I would only push back against that observation with the deal with the Democrats by a president who wrote art of the deal and said, I'm going to get something done, and then at least got something done with regard to the debt ceiling. It wasn't what Republicans wanted. But he does have the ability to do that, so I would hold off on judging whether or not he can govern. He certainly wasn't insurgent.
Sandra, can we look at the Roy Moore victory in the context of what else happened yesterday?
Yes,
which was the crushing defeat of the Republicans' probably final effort to attack Obamacare. I know we're going to get to it later, but to me, the two of them happening at the same time and the same day to the same president has to sting.
And Bob Corker announcing he's not going to run for re-election. Bob Corker, a key ally of Mitch McConnell, a mainstream establishment Republican.
Asking him to run.
And then that leak that the president said privately to a group of legislators that Mitch McConnell was weak, that he wasn't doing a good job, which we all agree with probably. But this was not a good day for Mitch McConnell.
Does the president say anything privately that doesn't become public?
I don't know. It doesn't.
He would probably say it.
On the record.
I mean, he also has tweeted about Mitch McConnell, to be fair. But this was a day, absolutely right. Healthcare, Roy Moore, Bob Corker, Mitch McConnell did not have a good day.
But in terms of his agenda moving forward, Roy Moore is not going to oppose President Trump's agenda, despite the president not backing him in the primary.
Do you remember when President Trump said a few months ago, I want to put people who are my kind of Republicans in? So it is ironic that he struck a deal with Luther Strange. Maybe it was already baked in that he thought he couldn't win. I mean, that's another element that we haven't talked about.
Yes.
But the facts on the ground are Judge Roy Moore moves ahead.
What did you make of Moore, who you are saying you have known for quite some time, actually using those words, together we can make America great again?
I thought it was a brilliant political statement for him to make. I think he's going to be more Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, more on the small government Republican side. I want tax cuts, but I want spending cuts as well. Far more there than
reform plan, highly anticipated. This ahead of a speech by President Trump. Yesterday, he promised tremendous tax cuts for the middle class. Whether the GOP can get it done and if Democrats will help. Plus, why the president's battle with the NFL over the national anthem protests could help the GOP in next year's midterms. Whether Mr. Trump seized on a winning issue and if candidates can capitalize.
This is breaking. Republican leaders are now set to officially unveil their tax reform plan this afternoon. Earlier today, House GOP lawmakers met at a retreat in Washington, D.C., where they talked about what they're calling a unified framework to overhaul our tax system. President Trump will also be speaking on the plan later today when he goes to Indianapolis. He's promising bold reforms aimed at helping the middle class. Watch.
It will be a very, very powerful document. We will cut taxes tremendously for the middle class, not just a little bit, but tremendously. That includes nearly doubling the standard deduction that most families take on their taxes.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. So this is huge. Unified. How unified is it?
That's a great question, Harris. We will see when they count votes, but so far so good. This is the big rollout day as the White House and congressional leaders get the ball rolling on making the tax code simpler and fairer. Here are some key points of that proposal. Doubling the standard deduction, increasing the child tax credit, slashing the corporate rate from 35% to 20%, lowering the top individual and family bracket from 39.6% to 35%, and collapsing 7 individual brackets to 3. A House Republican leader spoke to us this morning about getting to work on making that happen.
We would welcome working with the Democrats on tax reform. This is one of the best things that we can do for our economy. We've seen a stagnant economy. We've seen wages stagnant. And we're most excited about bringing down those tax rates and empowering individuals that are living paycheck to paycheck.
President Trump sat down face-to-face with bipartisan members of the Ways and Means Committee, which handles tax matters in the House. The president emphasized cutting taxes tremendously for the middle class, lowering rates for businesses to create more jobs and higher wages, and working to bring back trillions of dollars in wealth from overseas. Democrats are complaining it will benefit the rich and could add to our national debt.
I was in the Oval Office in 2001 when the proposal for $1.3 trillion of tax cuts was offered, another trillion in 2003, and I said it was all advertised on the basis of growing the economy. Problem is there was very slow growth during those years.
Republicans say if they get those numbers down in terms of the tax rates, it'll get the economy growing and will reduce the deficit. This is just the start of the conversation on what's expected to be the dominant issue here on Capitol Hill this fall. Harris?
Well, some on the Democrat side may say it's pie in the sky, but we love pie, so we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Take care.
Wouldn't it be amazing and exciting if they could actually get something done? And I argue, Marie, the Democrats would be excited too, because there's nothing moving in Washington.
It
Very
is
little.
Nothing. No, nothing was the better word.
So boring down there.
Say it again, Marie.
That would be true breaking news, right, if we actually got something done. I think Democrats are looking forward to seeing the details of this. I think they're looking to see the million-dollar question, which is how will you pay for this? And I think the president's talked about needing or hoping there'll be something like 6% growth. I think most economists think that's probably not realistic. But yes, if the middle class gets tax cuts, if we lower tax rates for everyone, I think this is one, if it's done the right way, Democrats might get on board with. And we'll see today in Indiana, Joe Donnelly is a key senator up for re-election who's willing to work with the president.
All right, so I want to throw something up on the screen for you to talk about, Judge. It is a poll on federal tax system and major changes. People looking for it say they would like it 33%, a complete overhaul 35%. So somewhere in the middle are some percentages that I would imagine they'll just take what they get, because it's got to be an improvement, right?
One of the campaign attacks that Donald Trump used very effectively was, who understands the tax code? Right. He says.
No one raises their hand.
I don't even understand that he's saying it's so complicated. You know,
what's up with Sanders? She's really good with numbers. I'm trying to understand all this. We need more.
70,000 pages long, if you include the interpretive material purporting to explain it. So I don't know if they'll be able to simplify.
But there's something very important that is happening right now, and when you look at the stock market, okay, it's up like 2 points right now. It's doing nothing. It's waiting for the president to speak later, waiting for the details of this plan. But it is sitting at a record high. It has been rising, in most part, in anticipation of an administration that has promised to be business friendly. And so when you look at some of the details, like lowering the corporate tax rate to 20, it's at 35 right now.
Huge.
Limiting the max tax rate for small businesses to 25%. It's at least injecting a positive atmosphere.
Right, let me be
the
skunk at the garden party a little. Under the Constitution, tax legislation has to begin in the House. It cannot begin in the Senate.
Well, that's what's happening, though.
Correct. And the House has about 40 to 50 Republicans in the conservative caucus.
Yep.
All of whom will insist that it be revenue neutral, meaning if they're going to lower taxes, they have to lower spending. What Democrat in the Senate is going to go along with that?
Well, there's a couple of interesting
Well, how can you even do that, though? How can you make it revenue neutral?
Well, There are some interesting themes coming from the White House on their push today. The first is that they want to work with Republicans to be united in pushing all of this out. The next is that the president is signing this from Indianapolis, the state fairgrounds, which is the same place where Vice President Mike Pence signed the largest tax cut in history for Indiana, and they argue that promoted economic growth and jobs. In terms of how they're moving forward, the president out of the gate has been bipartisan. He has invited Senator Joe Donnelly, Senator Heidi Heitkamp to his speech today to stand with him in this. I'm not sure if they've confirmed yet, but that is the goal. And they also want to be unabashed in their ideology in terms of allowing more people to keep their own wealth, develop their own wealth, and keep the money that they have earned for their families.
And are they going to borrow more money in order to do that, or are they going to stop spending?
Well, the White House has said, we're going to send this structured. This is a plan. This is not legislation. It's a structured thing that we're sending to the House.
Heitkamp's actually been on Air Force One at the president's invitation. Not every Democrat, though. Let's watch this from Nancy Pelosi. Democrats have always been willing to engage in bipartisan tax reform. Republicans' tax framework is not tax reform. It is a framework that gives away the store to the wealthiest while sticking the middle class with the bill, end quote. Judge?
Sounds like Bernie Sanders. Well, this is the issue. The president cannot do this without some input from the Democrats. Am I right?
And less than 40 legislative days left in the year. Not a lot of time.
Well, listen, I want
my
taxes.
heart just went pitter-patter. That's a lot of stress.
I want everybody's taxes to go down, but I'm just trying to articulate the political obstacles to this happening. He needs 60 votes in the Senate, and he needs those conservatives in the House to be persuaded that they're not going to have to borrow more money to run the government because they're collecting fewer tax dollars.
Real quickly, and when you read through this, it hits almost every category. So some people aren't going to be happy that the wealthy are getting anything at all.
I don't think they are. If you
they may not.
If you look at the details of this, the state deductions are going away. So if you look at certain tax rates for certain states like California, New York, Illinois, if you're in a higher tax bracket at the top, which is the rich that the Democrats are saying, you're not going to be able to get a deduction, and you're going to pay more. So Democrats actually might want to take a second look at this.
State-wise, that's true. All right, we'll move on. Whew, we could go on for days. It's so hot. The Russian investigation is intensifying. Now one former Trump advisor says the president should fire special counsel Robert Mueller out of fear he will manufacture a case against the president. Is he right about that? House Republicans are renewing calls for a second special counsel to investigate 2016 controversies, including former FBI Director James Comey's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Is that a good idea? We'll talk about all of it. Stay close.
Fox News Alert special counsel Robert Mueller and his team could begin conducting interviews with current and former White House aides as early as this week. This, as longtime Trump ally Roger Stone says the president should fire Mueller. Watch.
Do you think that the president should fire Bob Mueller?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because he auditioned, or I should say interviewed, for the job of FBI director the day after Mr. Comey resigned, or was fired, pardon me, and was passed over for that job. That, to me, constitutes a conflict.
Stone also had this to say about Mueller's intentions for targeting former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort.
I think what's happening here is that the special counsel will try to manufacture a crime and then say, look, Manafort, we won't prosecute you for this if you simply admit you were colluding with the Russians and that Donald Trump knew everything. In other words, bear false witness against the president.
Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators say they'll protect Mueller's investigation should the president try to fire him. GOP Senator Lindsey Graham, co-sponsor of a bill aimed at doing just that, saying this: I want the president to know that there is a process in place and there are checks and balances long before you got here, and they will be here long after you are gone. I just want everybody in America to know that Mueller is going to do his job without fear of reprisal. So what can and can't the president do here, Judge?
Well, the president can fire Bob Mueller because the president is the chief law enforcement officer of the land, and even though Mueller may be investigating the president is ultimately his boss. Now, that I have to tell you would be extremely unwise politically, in my view, and would accelerate greatly any effort to impeach the president. I hate even to raise that, but that's what will be raised by Republicans and Democrats. You saw the antagonistic tone in the statement from Senator Graham that you just read, long after you're gone. Marie gasped, as did I, when we heard that read. But Roger Stone has a point. It is a long-standing procedure of federal prosecutors when they want somebody at the top of a totem pole to indict people at the bottom, even for things that have nothing to do with the person at the top, and then negotiate with them.
Yeah.
So I would suggest the language to Manafort would be, you're facing 20 years in jail. That 20 will go down to 9 months max if you can tell us this, or this about the man in the Oval Office. To lay people, that's reprehensible. To those of us who've been in and out of law enforcement, who've observed it from the bench or have been prosecutors, that's the way the federal government works.
Well, and we've already seen the pressure put on. I mean, look at the raid on Manafort's home. These were not like friendly moments by these investigators. I mean, if you look at what he's been through the last few months, look, the message is definitely getting out there. Not only the 20 years versus the 9 months, but how about me just being able to sleep till 8 o'clock in the morning?
Well, what they did to Manafort is the way they treat drug dealers or violent criminals, not white-collar people who have lawyers that are cooperating with the Justice Department, lawyers that used to work for the Justice Department.
But they clearly thought that he wasn't cooperating, which is why they did this raid on his home. And I think it's important to point out that Paul Manafort has been under FBI investigation for 3 years.
Yes.
Did not start with the Trump campaign.
Yes, you're exactly
Paul Manafort brought his legal baggage from whatever he's been doing in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, with Russia, wherever. He brought that to the Trump campaign. That is his responsibility. In terms of the special counsel investigation, I don't think it's surprising that Bob Mueller is going to the White House to interview folks who were there, because he's going to be thorough in his investigation.
Part of his job.
Clearly he wants to know what was going on.
You want him to be, so if and when they don't find any evidence, everybody can move on. So if they short step now, if they play the short game now, it actually doesn't help the president or anyone.
Let me raise another name that was raised by Senator Blumenthal yesterday, Mike Flynn.
Yes.
I think it is almost a certainty that the government, Bob Mueller, through a grand jury, will indict General Flynn and Paul Manafort for something, probably something having nothing to do with Donald Trump, the candidate, or Donald Trump, the president, and then try to negotiate with them.
I completely agree on that. One thing I do want to point out, I know that a lot of people are concerned, especially because of the attorneys that Bob Mueller has hired who have very close ties to Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. But there is going to be...
Close ties like checks written.
Right, checks written, donations. But there is going to have to be a reconciliation of investigations here. The special counsel will have their own independent investigation. But let's not forget that the Senate Judiciary Committee is also doing an investigation, and the Senate Intelligence Committee is also doing one. So looking at those, and the House Intelligence Committee, looking at the 3 or 4 when they're all done, and looking at what adds up and what doesn't is going to be important at the end of this.
So, Marie, what does happen?
I don't think the president will fire Bob Mueller. I truly don't. I totally agree with the judge that Mike Flynn and Paul Manafort are the two that are in most serious legal jeopardy. I mean, you're right. Paul Manafort was being investigated before the Trump campaign. Mike Flynn has done every sort of shady thing that no one would. And he got fired after how many days? A couple months. So they really brought attention to the campaign that was not wise, I would say. But look, we wouldn't even have Bob Mueller if Jim Comey hadn't been fired.
I seem to always go back to that point.
Because I think
Bannon goes back to that point too.
Bannon goes back to that point. This is where Steve Bannon and I agree with each other.
It's not
this is where Steve Bannon.
When he was fired. If Trump had fired him at the beginning when he won the election,
that's right. And he had Democrats behind him on doing that.
And the manner of his firing as well.
Exactly.
And saying on national TV, I didn't like the way he was doing Russia. I think it is a cautionary tale for the president if he's even thinking about firing Bob Mueller. That will get worse.
All right. You have last word there. Meantime, House Republicans renewing their call for a second special counsel to investigate the controversies involving Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration during last year's election. This follows allegations that former FBI Director James Comey drafted an exoneration statement for Clinton weeks before interviewing her and more than a dozen key witnesses. Republicans also complaining that Comey didn't record interviews with Clinton and her associates despite Justice Department policy encouraging the practice. In a letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein, they write, in part, quote, "In this case, it appears that Director Comey and other senior Justice Department and government officials may have prejudged the matter before all the facts were known, thereby ensuring former Secretary Clinton would not be charged for her criminal activity."
I got to tell you, this is another letter written, with deference and respect to the signers of it, ignorant of the way law enforcement works. All prosecutors know at the outset of their investigation who they plan to charge and what they plan to charge them with, and then they look and see if the evidence is there. If Jim Comey decided there wasn't enough to prosecute her a month before her late June, early July, may have been 4th of July weekend, if I remember correctly, interview, that's because he knew what was going on, and he was just wanted to see whether she contradicted what they had or whether she supported it. And in terms of another special prosecutor, Jeff Sessions could go to a grand jury tomorrow and indict Hillary Clinton. He doesn't need a special prosecutor. I'm not suggesting he'd do it. But if he really wants to say that Jim Comey dropped the ball and Hillary's guilty and there's enough evidence of prosecution, that's the question. I don't know why he doesn't want to.
Maybe because there actually isn't enough evidence. Have we ever thought that might be true?
I think there's enough evidence. I think there's enough evidence to indict and convict, but I haven't seen their internal file. I only know what's in public.
Well, when they give their entire inner circle immunity before they interview anybody, and they allow her top aide Cheryl Mills to also represent her as an attorney, which means that she wasn't. Exactly. She was given immunity. It wasn't just again going back to this point that I've made before. This wasn't just about Hillary Clinton. This was about her aides around her, like her Abedin, also mishandling highly classified information. And if this was Republican, you can bet a Democrat president would go after them. And it's President Trump's responsibility to call for this, by the way. He said he would do it on the campaign trail, and then immediately after he won election, he said,
so what if they find,
Hillary, we're not going to go
find classified information on these new private emails that Jared and
then I would think that they should be looked at for prosecution.
So, but I wanted to get this in there, Katie and Marie, because they're also wanting to look into that tarmac meeting with Loretta Lynch, and that's going to be...
I mean, look,
and there's a lot of there because she's already said she regretted it.
The House GOP is looking at going into a midterm with no legislative successes. If they want to spend their time relitigating 2016
why can't they do both?
And obsessed with Hillary Clinton, because they have shown themselves incapable of doing anything, Harris.
Let me tell you.
So look, they need to focus on legislating. They need to focus on legislating and get over Hillary Clinton.
Let me tell you another dirty little secret of the Justice Department, which they don't want the public to know. The Justice Department does not like to prosecute or indict its predecessors because it doesn't want to be scrutinized by its successors. That's wrong, but that's a common culture. That is a common culture in government today in both political parties.
Boy, so many creatures in that swamp.
Lots of different
kinds. Do you think they fight over the food?
I thought we
Katie and I still live there, you know.
Absolutely. Alligators, snakes. All those things are rolling around in different departments.
Yeah, it's a great point, though. It's a great point, though. Why doesn't this Attorney General step up and do what he can do in terms of prosecuting Hillary Clinton?
Because maybe
if there is evidence there, why not do it?
Maybe there isn't, though.
We don't know.
All right. President Trump, during the campaign, warned about the dangers of terrorists sneaking into the U.S., seeking asylum. Now he's expected to make a historic cut in the number of refugees allowed into the country. Will that keep America safer? We will debate.
Welcome back. Officials say President Trump is planning to drop the cap on the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. to a historically low level. Mr. Trump, during the campaign, warned of terrorists smuggling themselves into countries by posing as refugees fleeing war-torn Syria. Back in 1980, the refugee admissions cap hit more than 231,000, and under President Reagan in 1986, it dropped to a historic low of 67,000 refugees. President Obama increased the limit to 110,000 refugees for the 2017 fiscal year, and now President Trump is expected to drop the cap to 45,000 refugees for the 2018 fiscal year beginning next month. But refugee groups blasting the anticipated cap, saying it breaks from America's tradition of helping immigrants in need. Marie, I'm going to you first because you worked in the State Department and are very familiar with refugee issues. The U.S. has historically limited refugees based on national interest, national security, the economy. Why is what President Trump is doing wrong, or should he be doing something else?
Well, there's also, though, been historically bipartisan support for the concept of taking in refugees who are fleeing war, civil war, torture, you know, death in a lot of these places. In places like Syria, these are people fleeing the terrorist. Most of them, right? So there's been this bipartisan support for this issue. I think this is a very cold-hearted, arbitrary number that he's looking at. And I think that when it comes down to it, the number of refugees who have committed terrorist acts in the U.S. since 9/11, how many? Who've killed Americans? 0.
Well, my question then
is... this isn't about keeping us safer. This is about playing to your political base and using an arbitrary number to sound good when you don't have a lot of other political
But Harris,
victories.
is it really, not something that's going to keep us safer? Because after 9/11, we dropped the cap to just 27,000 refugees in response to making sure we could figure out what was going on.
What's kept us safer was a combination of things. So you're talking about one of them. And Judge, I would lean in a little bit with you on this. Maria, I think the conversation has shifted a little bit. And it's shifted in this way. Yes, at first, the travel ban was leaning mostly in the direction of being able to find those among the refugees who might be coming here to harm us. But now I think it's a bigger issue of, do you know who's in your country at all?
Right.
Like, are you willing to do some extreme vetting to make sure that you know not just who is here, but how many of them? And let me finish. Not just how many of them, but what categories of people do they fall in? Are they willing to come here and do what it takes to become citizens? What are their goals? I mean, we want to be able to know who's coming into this country, irrespective of what we think they might do down the road. Now, when they get here and we aren't able to vet them through other ways, coming across our border or whatever, that's then coupling the situation of where you have sanctuary cities where people who are illegal can go to. So you want to know who's in your country. This is one way to guarantee that you know at least where some of them are coming from.
But let me jump in here just on the refugee admissions, because I worked on this at the State Department. Refugees go through the most intense screening of anyone who's coming to this country.
No, that's diametrically opposed to some of the reporting that we hear that they don't.
Let me finish now.
Okay,
I was involved in this process. I know how it works. Over 2 years for most of these refugees, we have biometric data. We look at their social media now. We have always said as a country that we believe, yes, you should screen people, but that there's a principle that we accept people fleeing violence, fleeing war. That's the refugee program. Refugees, we're not talking about sanctuary cities. We're not talking about illegal immigration. Those are two different things. You're right that they've been conflated politically, but I don't think they should be.
Judge, what about this question, though, of the emotional impact? We are still one of the most generous countries in the world when it comes to bringing in refugees. What about the legal perspective of how we can vet these people? What is the president's authority to lower the cap or increase the cap?
So for better or for worse, Congress has given the president near absolute authority to determine what the cap was. One might say, isn't this a statute and shouldn't it be resolved by Congress? But in fact, only the president, only the executive branch has the tools with which to engage in the vetting that you're talking about, so he can decide, or she can decide, do you want 25,000, who want 60,000, who want 300,000. My heart is with people who are fleeing oppression and are looking, as my grandparents did, for the United States of America as a beacon of hope to start their lives all over again. But under the law, the president has the power to make this decision, and the courts should not second-guess him when he uses this power.
And by the way, it is what he promised when he was running for this position as the president of the United States, and he was elected into office on this. So, Marie, to hear this shock coming from some members of your party over this, why is this so surprising?
Well, I'm not sure he ran on the refugee. I mean, I'm trying to separate refugees out from illegal immigration, from people who overstay visas, even from DACA, which you talked about, or from things like the Muslim ban, for lack of a better term. I know people don't. I knew you were going to say that. I'm just shorthanding this here.
You're the only one maybe who might be trying to do that at such an effective level, because even people in your party aren't doing that.
I think we can be. The president has also talked about being compassionate in his immigration policy, and when we talk about refugees, let's screen the heck out of them, especially from places where we're concerned about a national security threat. But I think he just picked a random number because it sounds good politically.
Actually, I'm not so sure. Sandra, let's talk about the economic impact of what it means to put refugees into American communities. A couple of years ago, the Democrat mayor of Springfield, Massachusetts, said, please stop sending Somali refugees here because our infrastructure as a city can no longer handle it. Maybe this isn't about necessarily just national security.
It's a great point,
infrastructure.
It's a great point, but you don't hear the president pushing and staying on that point. He sticks to the make America safer point, and so maybe he should lean on that more.
But you have a lot of mayors and governors who make the exact opposite point about economics, so maybe that's why he doesn't.
He talked about compassion in his new attitude about DACA. Maybe he'll talk about compassion on this.
Exactly.
Oh, he has authority.
That's what I'm looking for.
We'll see how it goes. The GOP already looking to cash in on President Trump's battle with the NFL over players taking a knee during the national anthem. Whether this is a good way to rile up the Republican base ahead of the 2018 midterms is next.
President Trump is standing firm in his battle with the NFL over players taking a knee during the national anthem. Here's what he said yesterday at a White House news conference.
I was ashamed of what was taking place. It's called respect for our country. Many people have died. Many people. Many people are so horribly injured. They were fighting for our country. They were fighting for our flag. They were fighting for our national anthem. And for people to disrespect that by kneeling during the playing of our national anthem, I think is disgraceful.
Now some Republicans are already looking to cash in on the controversy ahead of the 2018 midterm elections. GOP candidates have begun tying their campaigns to this cause in an attempt to appeal to disgruntled voters. And the RNC sent out two separate fundraising emails yesterday. One read this, quote, President Trump is under fire from the media for saying he's honored to stand for the national anthem. Do you stand with the president? Or President Trump for our flag, our country, and our heroes. Take the next step and stand with President Trump by making a contribution today. Judge?
I think that's probably a very effective campaign pitch for funds from the conservative Republican base, and I don't blame them for doing it. I profoundly disagree with the president telling the NFL how to manage the NFL. He campaigned on the idea that the federal government should not be telling businesses how to run their businesses. And the Supreme Court has written that the flag stands for the right to destroy and ignore it. So it certainly includes the right to genuflect in front of it.
But the White House response to this, as you've heard Sarah Sanders, when she holds her daily press briefings, she's bombarded with questions on this daily.
Right.
And she says that the president's only point is to defend the military. And she stands by that daily. And I spoke to a mother of a fallen SEAL yesterday who said her son would be so ashamed, so disgusted by what she said. And this president feels like he has to defend the military.
Well, listen, I don't blame the president for defending the military, but there are legitimate political views being expressed by those who kneel. And these are areas that the president shouldn't be taking these people on in because they have the right to do it. So why do the Jets and the Giants have more rights to do this than the Dallas Cowboys? Because the state of New Jersey, where they play, says employees can express an opinion in the employer's workplace as long as it doesn't materially interfere with their job.
Well, you know what? Look, after Vietnam, the Vietnam War, you were allowed to spit on soldiers coming home, too. And, you know, just because you can do it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I am glad that the president is standing up for the American flag and the national anthem in a very divided time. It makes me sad that this has become a political issue. I understand why they.
Republicans are raising money off of it. That makes it the ultimate political issue.
I don't blame them for seeing a political opportunity, but I do think that it's, you know, unfortunate that that's where we have come in the sense of putting this into political campaigns when it really should be an issue that is about all of us.
How about I disagree with what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it?
Exactly. I understand that, but...
You know, Judge, I've wondered this. I asked for us to show earlier this week a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King doing something similar, on his knees with all these protesters behind him. He reportedly at the time was praying. Maybe some of these people are too, I don't know. But is it too much to anticipate or ask that the NFL would take a look at itself right now with all the other issues it's dealt with in recent years, like domestic violence, still dealing with right now among its players, and you know, accusations legally against some of those players? Is it too much to say, look, just not this venue?
Well, too much
Why not the streets of a city where there's
say?
Been a lot of violence going on?
You'll like this. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, has the same First Amendment freedoms as the rest of us. He just has the biggest megaphone in the United States. He can't use the power of the government to prevent this kneeling, but he can use the power of the bully pulpit to address and isolate the kneeling, which is what he's been doing.
The NFL can also use their own policies, which are written down, to have players stand for the national anthem. There's actually a very detailed section in their policy that talks about you stand there with your helmet by your side and you're in silence.
If Jerry Jones,
so they could save themselves a lot of trouble with their fans, which, by the way, Dish Network is reporting that a lot of people are rejecting TV, excuse me, are reporting that a lot of people are canceling their NFL package. They're going to see this wording, and they're going to have to make a decision.
That's the appropriate response, exactly. Which is the free market. Right. If Jerry Jones orders the Cowboys to kneel and during the national anthem, one of them decides to stand, can that person be punished?
Did you just say that's not the right thing to do? Someone can't cancel their subscription?
No, I meant the NFL shouldn't make a rule. I was saying I don't think it's one. I don't think it's the right thing to do that the NFL should say you have to stand, because the president's trying to make this about support for the military, and the people protesting it are focused on a totally different issue.
The NFL has that rule. By the way, both of the issues are very important.
Right. Both of the issues are very important. Neither one of those issues is the one that's getting talked about in all this. We're fighting over where they do this and how they do
even among friends and colleagues.
Absolutely. This has become incredibly emotional. And it's become partisan. The fact that it's part of a fundraising pitch.
All right, we got to go. We'll be right back.
Thank you to Judge Napolitano. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure, team. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, we're back on TV tomorrow at noon Eastern. Happening Now starts right now.